So we're on part 2 of chapter 26, chapter 27. So we're going to look at the European Union. That's where we left off. So the European Union is an economic union. Anytime they try to do anything like political, there's been a lot of opposition to it. So in 1999, the European countries went to the euro. Not all of them, like Britain kind of resisted all the way to the end. They didn't want to go off their pound, but their pound has been worth more with currency than the other countries. So you'll have a common agricultural policy. What this means is that these countries will give subsidies to their farmers, and they're giving subsidies to their farmers so that they can be competitive on the world market. There's been a less successful attempt in trying to get some common foreign policy. Really, the reason why that happens is because of nationalism. They don't see themselves as Europeans. They might see themselves as British or French or Greek, and not necessarily as Europeans. So that nationalism seems to be the sticking point on why they can't get something maybe more political going. Towards the United Europe, so the EU, the European Union, has expanded into Eastern Europe. So you saw in 2004 a lot of European countries joining it. So we're going to look at the emergence of the United States. And after World War II, the United States really comes out as the new superpower in the world. So the American politics and society through the Vietnam era. So FDR, he was the president during the Great Depression, and the New Deal era, and World War II. So FDR has done kind of a social program where he did Social Security, he did the TVA, the AAA, the CCC, all this nice alphabet stuff, right? So the New Deal was aimed at the 3 R's: relief, recovery, and reform. He needed to fix the things that went wrong that caused the Great Depression. So the banks, the stock market, this is what the guy tries to fix. And he's going to make things permanent. So like Social Security, he's the guy who starts that. Really what brings the United States out of the Great Depression is the actual war. So World War II is what pulls the U.S. economy into a safety zone. And after the war is over, America has a post-war boom. I mean, we got a lot of kids in the country because the soldiers come home and they're having 3, 4, 5 kids. They're having more kids than replacement. And replacement just means you have 1 kid for your spouse and 1 kid for you, and that's it. That's replacement level. So they're having a lot of kids. And so that's why you see suburbs developing in the United States. But by the 1960s, we got new issues emerging in the United States. John F. Kennedy is going to become the next president. So in the election of 1960, we see the effect of television on the mass media. John F. Kennedy is young. He's got a nice-looking family. You know, he's nice-looking versus Richard Nixon, who's a little bit older, and he was not as coached in how they appear on television as Kennedy was. So Kennedy will win. And he wins bringing in Camelot, and he's the guy that we see with the Cuban Missile Crisis, and we'll talk about more about that later, the Bay of Pigs invasion, the Berlin Wall. He's a guy who will do the Peace Corps, and the Peace Corps is students who go around to third world nations or undeveloped nations and will help out, like teach basic skills, build wells, do things like that. Now, when Kennedy is assassinated in Dallas, Texas in November 1963, we're going to see Lyndon B. Johnson, his vice president, become the new president. When Lyndon B. Johnson comes in, he is going to declare a war on poverty, and this is what he calls his presidential program, the Great Society. So LBJ was FDR's kind of protege. FDR, he was around him, so he picked up on the New Deal program. And so during his presidency, you will see Lyndon B. Johnson trying to make everything equal for people. He's going to believe that poverty is what causes all the issues. So he'll do food stamps, he'll do the Job Corps, really see a lot of education expansion because LBJ was a former teacher, and he was a teacher from Texas, so he taught the minorities, he taught the Hispanic children that a lot of the other teachers didn't want to teach, because you're still talking about a segregated America during this time period. But in the 1960s, African Americans are going to start fighting for civil rights, and one of their most dynamic leaders will be Dr. King. There's plenty of other ones. He's just the one who gets the most press because he's going to do the March on Washington. The March on Washington is where Dr. King says, "I have a dream." And what he's talking about, remember, is the desegregation of society. Kennedy is killed before civil rights could get passed through, so it's LBJ who will actually pass the Civil Rights Act, and then the Voting Rights Act. So Civil Rights Act, you cannot segregate anything that's in public. And then the Voting Rights Act is to ensure that nobody's voting rights will be denied to them. So African Americans in the North, they will have the vote, but they often lived in ghettos. And ghettos are just ethnic neighborhoods. So even though you get the right to vote, you still are seeing society's neighborhoods being divided by race. Malcolm X is going to be a little bit more radical. See, Dr. King preached, nonviolence like Henry David Thoreau and Muhammad Gandhi. Malcolm X is going to not preach that. He preaches a very militant Muslim action. But when he goes to Mecca, because he'll go to Mecca, and he comes back to the United States, he will say, I saw white people praying, I saw black people praying, I saw Middle Eastern people praying, all together, and it was beautiful. And so he's not going to advocate for separation of the races or a militant action anymore, and that's when the Nation of Islam will kill him. Watts riot is going to be in Los Angeles. It's a terrible race riot in 1965, and we're going to see more riots after Dr. King is assassinated in 1969. 1969 is a really bloody year in American history. You've got Vietnam being escalated. You have Dr. King's assassination. You'll have Bobby Kennedy, John F. Kennedy's brother, assassinated as well by Sirhan Sirhan. So it's just a real bloody year in American history. There is going to be a white people backlash from all this stuff. You are going to see the KKK really resisting the integration of the schools and the integration of everything. And there's anti-war demonstrations throughout the United States against Vietnam because America is involved in Vietnam. And this was, remember, Vietnam's a civil war between North Vietnam and South Vietnam. North Vietnam's the communists, and South Vietnam is the democracy, and the United States will join in. When we join in, not every American after a while will agree with the war because it will be escalated. So we're going to constantly keep sending more guys over there, and it looks like we're never winning in Vietnam. And it looks like we're never winning in Vietnam because the Viet Cong army will launch the Tet Offensive. And we use biological warfare, so we'll use like Agent Orange and napalm. Agent Orange is a pesticide that will kill the jungle area, and napalm is like a sticky glue residue that you spray and then you just light it and it's like a firebomb. So we'll use these things. So some college kids are going to start protesting against the United States involvement in Vietnam, like at Kent State University in Ohio. The National Guard, they're going to shoot on college students who are protesting the war in Vietnam. So in America, even though we're a superpower, you really see people's civil liberties also getting violated, just like you see around the world. You're allowed to protest. You're just not allowed to, fire on people. But the National Guard will shoot and kill some student protesters. What we're going to start seeing by 73 is a shift right in America. So the election of Richard Nixon in 1968, we're going to see the politics shifting. He is going to use the Southern strategy and law and order issues. What this means is Nixon is going to enforce the desegregation of the systems. He's also going to make sure that law and order is followed. He promises Vietnamization, which is just the gradual removal of soldiers from Vietnam. But instead, he actually escalates the war in Vietnam by bombing Cambodia and Laos, two neighboring countries to Vietnam. The Watergate scandal eventually comes out. Watergate scandal is where Richard Nixon covered up, or allegedly covered up, a break-in at the Watergate Hotel. And if you've ever watched the movie Forrest Gump, Forrest calls and says, I think their lights are out over there. That's the Watergate Hotel that the break-in's happening. So Nixon's committee to re-elect him, which is called CREEP. I know that's creepy. But CREEP is supposed to, dig up dirt on the opponents, and they break into the hotel, and they get caught. It looks like Nixon knew about the break-in and tried to cover it up because there was some tapes, and there's like minutes, a lot of minutes missing from the tapes. So Nixon has to resign in 1974. He doesn't get impeached, but he probably would have been impeached for at least damaging evidence, but he resigns, and so he goes away. Now, Because Nixon appeared to be kind of corrupt, America wants a pretty boy who was going to save the day. And so Jimmy Carter is going to become the next president. Jimmy Carter was seen as a guy who was honest. So in the Carter administration, he's from Georgia. He faces a huge problem with inflation. And then the Americans are held hostage by the Iranian government. So the Ayatollah was a religious leader in Iran, and what's going to happen is the leader of Iran is going to leave because he needs medical help. We're going to take him in. The United States will take him in. And in that time period, the Ayatollah is going to go ahead and take complete control of Iran by students. Students, again, are going to lead this. And so they will kidnap the Americans at the American embassy in Tehran. And they'll hold them hostage for a year. They actually will release the hostages the day Ronald Reagan is sworn in the office. Carter tries to send in people to get our hostages out, but those people also get captured. So it was a failed success. It was a failed attempt to rescue them. The election of Ronald Reagan is in 1980. Ronald Reagan is a former actor. And so, but he is a very hard liner on communism, just like we saw with Truman. He does not believe communism and democracy can coexist. Excuse me. So the Reagan Revolution. He is going to reduce the welfare state. So he believes in trickle-down economics or Reaganomics, which means he helps businesses, and the businesses in return should create jobs, and by them creating jobs, there will be less unemployment. It's the same kind of thing that Herbert Hoover tried to do when the Great Depression first started. It didn't work in 29 to 32. In the 1980s, it seems to kind of work. He does build up the military, and that's when he does the SDI, or the Star Wars, the Strategic Defense Initiative. And so the military it's huge during the 80s, but it's huge during the 80s because Reagan is not a friend or a comrade of communism. He hates it. He does tax cuts to boost the economy, but you get a huge deficit because he's spending more money than he's bringing in, which means he is deficiting. He's taking out more money than he actually brings in. Bill Clinton is going to become the president after George H.W. Bush in 1993. And Clinton comes in. He's a moderate. He tries to adopt some of the Republican policies. He does get impeached over the whole Monica Lewinsky scandal, but he's not removed. Remember, you can be impeached and not removed. And impeached just means presidential wrongdoing or executive branch wrongdoing. So George W. Bush is going to be elected in 2000, so he's the son of George H.W. Bush. And after 9/11, he will declare a war on terrorism, and we will go into Afghanistan and Iraq to hunt down the Taliban, to hunt down Al-Qaeda. So he reduced taxes, and the environmental regulations are going to kind of get a little bit of a fudge. So the development of Canada. So now we're going to look at Canada, our neighbor to the north. So after World War II, there's a lot of economic and technological advances. You've seen a lot of things changing. What you see in Canada is a lot of Americans are investing in Canada. So a lot of American businesses are actually buying up Canadian businesses and owning them. So a lot of capital, a lot of money comes from the United States. There's problems and challenges, though, for Canada living in the shadow of the United States, living in the shadow of the superpower. Their economic prosperity, in part, is the result of controversial United States investment. We invested in there to make money, and that's why their economy grows. So you do get a welfare state under a Liberal Party rule. We'll get a bilingual civil service. So everything's got to be in English and French. That's the official language act. Conservatives are going to gain power in 84, and they're going to pursue economic policy of privatization. So they adopt controversial free trade agreements with the United States. The Liberals will come into power in 1993. And what you'll see is there is a movement for a free Quebec. Now we're going to look at Latin America since 1945. I'm going to stop here and we'll move into the next part for Latin America.